program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University. Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University, and welcome to our Touchstone Progression session, higher degree students and professional development. Wow, there's a story that got me here. I had a very powerful Skype conversation with a student, a PhD student in the sciences, and he wanted to make an appointment with me to talk about industry links and relationships. Terrific. And he wanted to get himself organised with professional development. The problem was he talked with his PhD supervisor, and the supervisor said to him, quote, "A student doesn't need any professional development," end of quote, and said just focus on the thesis, get the publications out, and the student will land a postdoc. Right, now this student was working very, very hard, and he doubted his supervisor. He wanted to remain anonymous, but he did want me to talk about with you what is professional development and why professional development matters. He also asked me why a supervisor would be recommending not to talk about professional development, and that's good too. So this remarkable young scientist had a plan, working incredibly hard, and he was confused why a senior academic would be against building up his CV. So in answer to this question, and out of respect for the student, I wanted to deliver this Touchstone session for supervisors so we can be together really honest and clear about our changing times and the need for professional development. Let me explain why this supervisor is saying what they're saying. And I understand it, it's logical, it's rational, but let's all go back in time. Now, I finished my PhD in 1994. Yes, I am that old. Dinosaurs roamed the earth. Now, before that, I finished a research master's in 1992. Yes, the story gets worse. Now, no professional development programs of any kind were offered in these degrees. No how to write a literature review, no how to construct a CV. There was no sense of how to write a teaching philosophy. There were none of these sort of skills that were part of this PhD or research master's program. So we did the research for the thesis with or without good supervision, without in my case, and then we submitted. So it was all about an individual supervisor, and we were left with the vagaries of that particular supervisor. The support for attaining work was pretty well non-existent. Indeed, my dreadful PhD supervisor told me not to take up my first academic job and to remain his part-time tutor in his first year course. Bless. So as you can see, there was nothing, absolutely nothing outside of the PhD. Do the PhD and you'll be fine, you'll get a postdoc. Now, firstly, that wasn't true at that time. It's certainly not true now. So what's happened since that period? Well, we've got an expansion in the number of PhD students, a reduction in the full-time and permanent academic staff in our universities, a reduction in the number of PhD students that end up in a university job, and a diversification of our students beyond the young men in the sciences on scholarship. So in a simpler time, with fewer students, with undertrained supervisors, students completed a PhD and then left one university for another university where they would work. Supervisors were not trained to supervise. They supervised how they thought they should supervise, or indeed how they thought they were supervised, which is a very different thing. Few had any teaching qualifications of any kind. They were an academic, certainly, but they used homology to teach their PhD students. So they used homology, they taught PhD students to be an academic just like them. It was a highly under-regulated time. The Research Code of Conduct was not in place. The Vancouver Protocol was just starting to hover, without teeth, of course, and there were few regulations of personal, professional, social or sexual relationships between students and supervisors. Students enrolled, graduated and hopefully got a postdoc. There was no, and I mean no, support from a university to gain a job or to help a student if a student's research was in trouble. Supervisors had no professional development themselves, let alone encouraging it in their students. So, to give you a sense of the scale of the problem, and this is what I talk about with students, about the scale of the change. In my research masters, all the higher degree students in this pretty elite university had to apply for 5 places in a 10-week teacher training course. That's how rare it was. Now, I got that gig. Can I say that course was pretty basic? It taught, the old model of reflexive teaching and how to create a link between teaching and learning. But significantly, that professional development program was so rare that it had to be applied for, and very few people got access to that program. So this was the time of the successful research academic, inspiring others to be successful research academics with no training to be a supervisor and no teacher training of any kind, and therefore simply not knowing what they don't know. Then, 20 years ago, the sociological changes happened to the PhD program. More women suddenly appeared. Women are still not quite at 50% of PhD programs in Australia, but it's getting very close now. And in North America in 2017, and for the first time, women were over 50% of PhD students in a PhD program. Now, of course, international student mobility has increased, and a few, but a stunningly important few, group of Indigenous students clawed their way through the colonial university system and got themselves into universities and got themselves into doctoral programs. But also students with impairments and diverse learning strategies appeared, and yes, the average age of commencing PhD students increased. But one thing stayed the same: the attrition rates in our PhD programs. Half the students that started did not finish, and you've guessed it, the people who didn't finish were women, students of colour, Indigenous students, older students, and students with a disability. They dominated the rates of attriting students. So you can see the individual supervisor as God model is failing. It was always failing, and it is still failing. At this point, professional development started to appear for supervisors. Now, it was based on, I would argue sadly, but it was based on the undergraduate teaching programs that also appeared for academic staff, noting, of course, undergraduate attrition rates. It was clear that academics had no real idea how to create a subject, learning design, assessment, mark beyond a personal or a subjective lens. So after some teaching preparation for undergraduates was required, some changes emerged in the supervisory training that academics had to do. Now, this is still controversial to this day. Every single day, I have supervisors complain that they have to complete any professional development. Literally 20 minutes of learning about supervision is supposedly affronting to their status. Now think about it. For the student who requested this Touchstone session, professional development is deeply distasteful for this group of supervisors, and therefore it's not surprising they don't recommend it to their students either. So just focus on the thesis. And that is code from a supervisor to neglect professional development. Assume that a student's going to be an academic and it's all going to be okay. Well, if we've learned anything from the last 20 years, I think we now know it's not going to be okay. We all need a plan B, C, D, E, and F. A student has a right to earn a living in difficult times. But let's start with our student today and now and talk about professional development today. The first use of the phrase professional development appeared in 1857. Now, that weird date might not be as surprising as it seems, because the professions were forming during the 19th century, so it's no surprise that professional development followed. Many fields and disciplines dominated this early professional development. Obviously, teachers, health professionals, lawyers, engineers, accountants, the military. Professional development is part of lifelong learning that is frequently more focused on, say, concrete deliverables for a career. Professional development can be pleasant and it can involve a self-starter mentality, or it can be mandatory and mandated by regulatory requirements. Now, we sort of have both in the higher degree space. It can be formal through degrees, but can also be pre-service or in-service professional development. In-service professional development focuses on skills, so team functioning skills, time management, having difficult conversations. Professional development is about exposure to ideas and disciplines and skills that a person doesn't know about. Professional development is the continual training of an individual through their career. It can maintain professional credentials, certainly, and it can maintain a currency in a field. Professional development keeps all of us current. And that's particularly important for PhD students because our programs are unique and deploy different learning methodologies and topics that are very dependent on student needs. So, if you will, in a professional development program in a PhD gig, students are in charge. So a student has to do a skills needs assessment. What are the student's strengths? What are the student's weaknesses? And a student structures the components of professional development that creates movement in their areas of both strength and weakness. Professional development can take 30 minutes or less, like our Touchstone program, or it can involve formal degrees that take years. Now, most of these sessions today are online and can be fitted around a citizen's responsibility, their working life, their personal life. Professional development has particular characteristics. It's frequently situated in practice, it is collaborative, and it incorporates reflection and evaluation. There are different modes of professional development. Formal degrees are obviously professional development, so is coaching, communities of practice, mentoring, reflexive practice, and micro-credentials. A student can have a wide choice of the modes that suit them. So I'll just talk about, at the end of this Touchstone session, a few of the most frequent professional development models that exist at the moment. Obviously, consultancy. This occurs when an organisational unit has a problem and they bring in someone from the outside to workshop that problem and try and facilitate a solution. Now, this can work, but it is reactive. It's a reactive practice to solve a problem rather than getting ahead of the problem, which of course should be the characteristic of professional development. Then of course we've got coaching. Coaching has become big in the last decade. Coaching often involves hiring a person to work on a specific skill set area. So there's an observational stage, then a reflexive or reflection stage, and then an action stage for change. And I'll talk about one more model, the mentoring model. This is a one-on-one strategy to increase the awareness of the state of an individual's career, and then they provide structured opportunities for reflection and improvement. Professional development programs really do matter. They matter to individuals and a workplace because it is professional development that allows an individual human to adapt and adjust to the changing nature of work and the workplace. I finished my research master's degree in 1992. I graduated from my PhD in 1995. Now, when I'd entered my master's degree, I'd already had 2 bachelor degrees. And when I completed my PhD, I'd already completed 2 bachelor degrees and 2 master's degrees. So I had a chunk of formal learning before I entered my research degrees. But none of these qualifications prepared me to be a knowledge worker in a university. A PhD does not teach a student how to teach, to enact curricular design, differentiated learning, multimodality, how to configure assessment. A PhD does not teach a student how to be an active citizen, an organic intellectual, a disseminator of ideas, how to write journalism. It's assumed that a PhD is the only preparation for working in a university. So what happens is a student looks at the qualifications of academics around the world, and what students are seeing is most academics stop all their qualifications at the PhD. It is a terminating degree, and of course that PhD was some decades in the past. So that is why it's very tough to convince academics to enact professional development in supervision. They have experience, certainly. They are an experienced supervisor, no doubt. My respect on that. But of course, it's never been assessed if it is bad experience, and if they're repeating this bad experience generation after generation after generation. Professional development is an intervention in a student's life, an intervention in an experience. It stops business as usual. It reminds all of us as citizens that our lens is only one of many. There are many views, many perspectives, many different research imperatives, and it is research that should lead a supervisor's views, not a singular experience of supervision. Whenever we start that sentence, when I did my PhD, problem. Because professional development is a set of tools, resources, training sessions to improve a supervisor's effectiveness. Now, this effectiveness is helpful for supervisors, it's helpful for a student's research life. Whether we're talking about statistical training, methodology, library, information literacy sessions, personal development, such as managing difficult people, time management, or career development, creating a student or staff member's preparedness for the next step in their career. So since my PhD, I have completed a Bachelor of Education, a Master's of Education, Graduate Diploma in Internet Studies, Graduate Diploma in Gastronomic Tourism, and I've completed a Master's of Leadership. And that's beside all sorts of different coaching certificates and MOOCs and short courses. And I cannot convey to you how much these courses have given me. At its most basic, the Bachelor and the Masters of Education got me a professorship in education and a head of school of teacher education. And that is a workplace advantage. In terms of research, the qualifications I've gained since my PhD are responsible for 55 refereed articles of my 260 refereed articles. And those qualifications have been the foundation for 5 of my 21 scholarly monographs. So as you can see, a slice of research innovation comes from professional development. So you can see, I hope, in our touchstone today, what a gift learning is. And that is why we enact professional development programs for supervisors, and that's why we scaffold and we model this innovation for our students. Thank you so much for your time. Take care. Thank you for listening to Touchstones, our professional development program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University.